This is Garrett again. Actually, I just finished up writing a new book or tutorial ebook on how to create massive terrains or virtually endless terrains for the 3D Game Studio game engine. It's something I've been working on for several years now, just practicing and testing out other pieces of software and trying to get everything right. My main focus was to create a game, an online MMO, where players could log into a world and never really explore every single location on the map. So really, when they take a walk or they go to explore, they're really going to explore, maybe even get lost, run into challenges, and maybe even try to resolve a few challenges. So that was my main goal. So over the past, I would say 2 years, I really focused hard on a specific program called Pnp Terrain Creator. You can search for it in Google, just type in Pnp, that's Papa November Papa dash Terrain Creator, and it should come up as the #1 result. If you take a look at their website, you can see that they offer a piece of software that will allow you to create a height map and some color maps that would be incorporated into the 3D Game Studio game engine without any issues. My problem in the past is when I went to test software out or use other third-party pieces of software, I could create very nice height maps. However, when I went to go convert the height map into a terrain file using the MED program for 3D Game Studio, when I imported it into the 3D Game Studio engine, I could never align it correctly. The vertices on the edge of the terrain itself would never line up to the one next to it. So really, I was struggling with this issue. So finally, I found Pmp Terrain Creator, and that's what I'm using now. And after some long testing, I've discovered that this program is fantastic for whatever your needs are for, I would say, creating small, medium, large, or virtually endless terrain. So what my book is about here is using Pnp Terrain Creator, how to incorporate my method of creating virtually endless terrain, creating color maps, creating height maps, importing them into MED, what settings to use in MED, the overview of the settings, why I'm using what I'm using, and then finally importing into the 3D Game Studio engine and aligning every single piece of terrain side by side using a formula I've developed, which is also included in this ebook. The resource files are included with it. It will show you what I do to create the virtually endless terrain. And the nice thing about this is that with my structure here and my technique, you're still going to be able to have a highly detailed terrain. Instead of seeing like a big blocky terrain with polygon faces that are just extremely massive, you now have a very small polygon face on the terrain. And with the formula that I have, you can align it just right so it virtually looks seamless, side by side. So really what you're doing is you're taking a bunch of terrain zones, aligning them side by side to create one massive terrain. The nice thing about this is that the 3D Game Studio game engine will also allow you to use an LOD function, or a line of distance or a line of sight type of function. That means that the terrain that's in the far distance that your player's not really walking on is going to be scaled down to a lower poly model. But as the camera gets closer to that zone or that piece of terrain, the terrain itself increases its detail level so it looks fantastic. And I can actually show you here. Actually, let me just take a quick look at my 3D Game Studio engine. This is the game I'm currently working on, Olive Palm. I know the code not very impressive here. It's probably very hard to see in the YouTube video, but it should be hard to see here when I go to run it. When this terrain loads, it's using my technique found in this ebook. And you can do the same thing actually if you follow along. So the camera started out underwater. Let me get above water here. Okay, and actually let me just take a look at something here. Minimize that. Play a little music with this. Okay. Alright, so here's the terrain I've been working on. I have my water effects, I have my sky. If you look at the sky, it's actually animated. The clouds move across the sky. This is also included with the resource files, which you can also download with the ebook. So here's the terrain. What you're seeing is 256 separate zones, all aligned side by side to create one massive terrain. Let's start going in here and taking a look at the detail level. Notice that the terrain in the background, as the camera gets closer, it almost adjusts itself, or it morphs itself into a higher poly piece of terrain. Let's get down 30 here with the water and the terrain itself. So really, if you're on the beach, you're looking out in the ocean, this is pretty much what you would see. The water effects, the water effects are very easy to achieve. So here's the terrain itself. You'll notice the textures that I'm using. I have sand, I have grass, and I have a rock texture. But look at the detail level in here. If you can imagine a player on the terrain, this is great. Usually you'd see this in the games nowadays. Whereas if you were to create like a single zone or use like WED for the 3D Game Studio engine, you come out with more of a blocky type of terrain. The edges that you see here with my mouse, and hopefully my mouse is visible at this time, here's an edge right here. That's just a single face there. Well, actually it's a vertex to vertex jump. But you can see the size of the face, the polygon face on the terrain. When you look into the distance, it's very hard to tell, but those are low poly terrains using the line of sight or the line of their LOD command in the 3D Game Studio engine. Like I said, as you get closer, you'll notice here, see the little gap here? Once all the objects are added into the game and my special effects and my trees, you'll never notice that. But watch as the camera gets closer here. There it is. At this point, it will actually morph into a highly detailed zone. So this is going to save you some frames per second overall. Then again, you're still able to get the high level detailed terrain. And it actually looks really cool. The texture itself, the textures that you see on the terrain are painted on by an RGB color wheel, red, green, and blue. If you were to look at my color map, that's all you would see is red colors, green colors, and blue colors. The textures you see here, I didn't actually paint it on. But notice, let me just show you something that's really cool. Notice the grass and the sand and everything like that. Watch what I can do within the matter of a minute's time. Let me just close the game engine down, go to terrain folder, go into these objects here, and just as an example, I have a grass texture here. Let me change the name to grass copy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up. Actually no, I already have a little texture in here. Let me change this image to maybe like a snowy type of color and see how that looks. Okay, so I'm changing the sand to more of a brighter type of white, or just a brighter color. We'll save this as grass.bmp, 24-bit always. Now let's go back and run the game. So if I wanted to change a texture, instead of going back and working with each individual piece of terrain or each file, I can simply change one texture in the folder because these are external files. So let's see if this, okay. So now that you're looking at the terrain here, you'll notice it looks like it snowed. That's because I was able to change the one texture and it was initialized on every piece of terrain. Kind of cool actually, I think, because if I ever want to modify the textures, I can do it within a matter of a minute. Whereas if you manually create every single piece of terrain for your game, you'll need to open up each file in MED and change that that texture or whatever if it's embedded with the file. So the nice thing about this is that it's very easy to work with. Not only that, but if you want to use or support terraforming in your game, you can. Terraforming, to me, my definition is, if you're a player and you're walking across this terrain, you could easily change the vertice height, which means you can raise or lower the terrain, which is cool in an MMO, because if you want to go and you want to build your house somewhere, or if you want to build a town somewhere, the terrain is easily modified to your liking. You know, you want to take a hilly side and you want to dig it down so it's flat so you can build your farm or put some animals in a fenced area, that's fine, you can do it. So the structure of this is just perfect, and it sets your game up for almost every feature you could ever imagine. There's very little downfalls, and with the way I'm going with this, it's not really common to run into an issue that's a showstopper. So now that you saw this, you saw my terrain, how it works, let's see if we can get up close to maybe an intersection of two pieces of terrain. We'll try to get it up here. You'll notice right here, got some LOD kicking in, but let's get a little bit closer. This is where the terrain meets. One terrain meets the other. Let's see if we can get real close here and see if we can find the seam line. Unfortunately, I'm having a really hard time trying to find the seam between these two terrains, but I know it's here somewhere. Let's go out here a little bit more. There's one. This might be a little bit more noticeable, I think. Okay, the seam line is right here, and I can barely tell it's there. So you can see how great this formula is that I use. The formula is all included in the resource files. And let me go back here and just show you. I have a script called terrain control. Notice every zone or every piece of terrain, which is a .hmp file, is given a pointer. Initializes a pointer in the very beginning. Once this pointer is created, the next time it's called is down here. When I say, alright, entity create, give it a pointer, give it a file name. I set the position, but with my formula, it automatically adjusts it to be relevant with the previous piece of terrain. So once I create it here, it calls the function adjust all. So going up to adjust all, this is the code right here. It first will scale the terrain, the X, the Y, and the Z coordinates. Once I like it, I'm going to give it a few properties such as the push equals 100, polygon equals on, so it actually uses every single face or polygon face for collision, and set my passable to off, which means if a player were to play on this piece of terrain, they're not going to fall through the terrain. The next set of properties is the texture scaling, or the texture mapping value. My skill 41, skill 42, and skill 43 are initialized. 41 is going to be my sand texture, 42 is going to be my rock texture, and 43 is going to be my grass texture. The grass is going to be the color green, rock's going to be red, and sand's going to be blue, as for the RGB spectrum or my color map. These numbers here, 50, 50, 50 is my scaling. If I make this 1000, if I go to render the game or go to execute the game, the textures will look extremely small, and they'll look mip-mapped, or they're tiled. However, if I set this to 1, the texture on the map will actually stretch out really big, and it'll look somewhat pixelated. So you gotta find the happy medium, but it's very easy to change these texture values. So going down, we're actually calling the material terrain multi 3, which is the 3 textured shader that I use for the special effects. This is open on the web, but it's also included in the resources folder that I have for this ebook. So when all this is taking place, and all the terrain loads, down here, which is in the ebook and also in my resource files, I have another pointer called Temp Pointer. Temp Pointer will relate to one of these terrains up here that I'm working on and I'm adjusting. And what I'll do is I'll initialize to say, alright, so I'm working with zone 256 here. I'm going to take this, put in my pointer down here, paste it. Once I paste it, the camera automatically selects the zone 256 and will position its X, Y, and Z coordinates directly above zone 256. The next thing I'm going to do is set some functions at the bottom. If I press the letters Q, A, W, S, E, D during development stages, I can move that piece of terrain that was declared in that pointer up or down in quantities of 10 quants, 0.02 quants, or 0.001 quants. Once I do that, I actually have a notebook that I'm using. But watch these values change when I press these buttons. Okay, so look at these buttons, or look at these numbers up here. If I were to use like the Q or the A, notice that my terrain's going up and down. Actually, let me get out of here a little bit so you can see at least an overview here. Okay, so when I press Q, terrain goes up, I can move it up and down. Now the formula that I'm using will automatically align it on the X and Y axis, no problem, but I need to adjust the height. Seeing that, of course, I have a huge scale here between the water level and the peak of the mountain, we have to adjust it a little bit. Alright, so notice these numbers changing up here. If I need to move it just a little bit, I can use the W key. You can barely really see it move because it's moving in such a small distance. And I can use the E and the D keys to move it very slightly. It's almost like a hair. But notice these numbers are adjusting themselves accordingly. So once I get my number, I'll write down, say, like 1360.855 in my handy dandy little notebook. Go back to my code, and for zone 256, I'm going to write that number right here. Just going to type it in. Of course, when you're in the development stages, that number that you get is going to be the number that allows that piece of terrain to align up side by side with the previous or the terrain next to it. So if the previous terrain, you already placed it, you already set its height. Now the next terrain you place, you can use your Q, A, W, S, E, D keys to adjust the height just perfectly, so those two terrains side by side look seamless. So all of this calculation and all these formulas are already in this tutorial, and you'll be ready to go and create some terrain using the Pmp Terrain Creator. And you can just jump in this and start setting your terrain. You can start off small and create 4 pieces of terrain, or take it a next step up and create 16 pieces of terrain. The next size up is 64 pieces of terrain. And last but not least, the last size is going to be 256. That should be enough to get you started. So the higher you go, the more detailed your level is going to be, but it's well worth it. There's a lot of time consumed there, but you're going to have a pretty kick-ass game. Alright, so that being said, I mean, everything's included. You can download this thing, you can execute it as you read the book, but as soon as you download it, you can run this script, which is written in A7.82. The reason why I'm still using A7.82 is because the terraforming that I need to do later on in my stages in my game, it's still functional. Whereas I tried A8 and I'm having a little bit of issues and I need to modify it a bit. So that's what it's compatible with. I'm not saying that A8's not compatible, I'm just saying that A8 you might have to adjust a few functions and commands within the 3D Game Studio script editor. So the document itself, just go to full screen mode, created a nice little cover here. It will go over a lot of stuff from start to finish. Introduction, it will go over questions and answers, troubleshooting. Now the questions and answers are from the previous document I wrote up my readers had questions to me in regards to my first document or just 3D Game Studio in general. I tried to address them the best I could and provide as much information such as links, source files, things like that to try to help them. I also have just useful links here that you can use for videos that I've created that's on my website. And then I begin the chapters. Of course, in the first chapter it goes over very basic details on, you know, what to look out for and what you're doing and how to prepare yourself for the last few stages, what type of texture to use, whether 32-bit, 24-bit, bitmap, is it target files, is it PCX. It covers all of this, so you'll be ready to go in no time. The document itself actually was read over by the developer of Pmp Terrain Creator, and it's been corrected, and we've adjusted this here. So me and the developer of Pmp Terrain Creator are on the same page, and everything is 100% accurate. Of course, I'm always here. If you do buy this guide, I'm always here to answer your questions, help you out, debug your terrain, work with you, connect up with a remote connection using VNC Viewer or RDC or TeamViewer and help you out. Also, I could work with you using voice over IP to get you started. No problem with that. So you should take a look at this, and if you have any questions or comments, just post them in the comments here on YouTube, and we'll see where we can go with this. So I'm excited about this. I have some great feedback. I actually have a handful of users who I've worked with over the past few years. I sent this document to them, and they're just ecstatic on what they can do. Completely amazed, but a lot of questions they have because it's all new to them. So currently the 3D Game Studio engine will support quote-unquote endless or infinite terrain, but it's more or less just you create a piece of terrain, and when you get to the one side, it puts you right back on the other. But it makes it look like it's seamless and endless. However, it's not. It's not unique. So this is a way to get the uniqueness. This is the way to get all the functions and features later on. And even with this zone type of system, you can load zones and, you know, load the objects and everything is just lined up perfectly in quants or in quantities of like 500 quants. So take a look at it. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any questions, please post.